So good evening, everyone. Very, very happy to be able to introduce Rabbi Michael Lotker for the third time, I believe, third out of five, to continue discussing Jewish mythology. So please take it away.
Okay, so it is a delight to be back with our third session. We've talked about the Shekhinah, mythology in general. Last time I can't remember what we talked about last time. My brain is fried.
Hamantashen.
We talked about how, yeah, I know we got, oh yeah, also we continued with feminine aspects of God and winding up with the feminine aspect of Hamantashen. So tonight we are going to begin talking about myths of heaven, hell, and the angel of death. So as I said, we're going to hell. Bring your own handbasket. Any questions before we start? If there's something, I'd be happy to address it. But here we go. So I presume you can see the screen. Yes. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'll mention it every time. For those of you that want to review some of these slides in greater detail, or even a video, when I did this a few years ago, I have a website. It's just lotker.com. Click on the classes, and then you just scroll down, and every one of the classes I've taught for the last 2 or 3 years is on there. So here are the texts of individual sessions. So for example, if you clicked over here, you would just see I think it's a PDF of the of tonight's discussion. And then you can actually click recordings, but there will be a recording of this session as well.
And also on our YouTube channel, if you want to see any of the previous lectures and the upcoming lectures, they will all be on YouTube. Our YouTube.
So this is sort of a fun cartoon. It captures what I hear a lot, and that is that Jews have this instinctive belief that hell is not really part of our teachings. And so, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm Jewish. Well, Mazel Tov. Judaism has always taught that there is something beyond this life. I would say more recently there's a variety of teachings, but certainly in traditional Judaism, there's always been a discussion of an afterlife. And as you'll see, there's no dogma on this. I think I have some slides about this. Yeah, so wait, Jews believe in an afterlife? So I'm often asked the question, what do Jews believe about the afterlife? And my somewhat flip response is, I don't know, go ask them. What you believe is something on one hand. What Judaism teaches is a whole other subject. Judaism has always taught that there's something. No one's come back to report on it, so we don't know exactly what that something is. And as you can imagine, this opens the door to lots of wonderful myths. So I'll take a quick dive into heaven and some Jewish mythology on heaven, and then hell, and then briefly meet the angel of death. And I only mean on the screen, hopefully not in person. But as I say, it's critical to bear in mind that Judaism's focus is on this world. And sometimes it may just be my own sort of knee-jerk reaction to why did Jews sort of downplay this idea of an afterlife? And I think it's because the afterlife is so important and so fundamental to Christianity. And there are many, many different Christian movements. I always point this out. There's something like 43,000 different Christian movements. And they all have different takes on what you're supposed to believe. But Christianity emphasizes what you are supposed to believe, whereas Judaism emphasizes what you are supposed to do. So Judaism will be obsessive compulsive about where do you hang the mezuzah, at what angle, what's kosher, what's not kosher, what's kosher for Passover, what's not kosher for Passover, on and on and on and on, the minuscule details of Jewish life. There are even Jewish teachings, I don't know if this is just Chabad or Hasidic, about what order you're supposed to cut your fingernails in. I don't know if you've ever heard this one, Rabbi Singer, but there's actually a specific order on how you cut your fingernails. So Judaism is obsessive about the details of living, and not so focused on what you must believe about an afterlife. Having said that, as you've begun to see in the last couple of sessions, Judaism has a lot of mythology, which is interesting and entertaining. So a survey, and I don't remember what year this is, according to a Pew Forum survey, 39% of Jews said that they believed in an afterlife, and it was the smallest of any group, even smaller than unaffiliated. People that are unaffiliated with any religion, 48% they said they believed in an afterlife, and about half the average of 74%. But Jews had the highest response of don't know or refuse to answer, 14%, double the average of 7%. And there's my theory. If the afterlife is so central to Christianity, this sort of an instinctive reaction, we must not believe it at all. So there are some excellent resources on the subject of Jewish views of the afterlife. And I also have an online class, which is 3 sessions like this, hour and a half per session. A nice survey by Sonsino and Syme called "What Happens After I Die," which has different scholars and representing different eras discussing the question of afterlife. A wonderful book, which actually changed my attitude on this subject, by Rabbi Eli Kaplan Spitz. He's a conservative rabbi in Southern California, called "Does the Soul Survive? A Jewish Journey to Belief in the Afterlife, Past Lives, and Living with Purpose." So it's a deep, deep discussion of reincarnation in Jewish thought. And then if you really want to take a deep, deep dive, Jewish Views of the Afterlife is a PhD thesis by Simcha Paul Raphael, and a very scholarly look at the details of Jewish views. Notice there's an S on views. It's not the Jewish view of the afterlife. It's Jewish views of the afterlife. And he goes through, the history of Judaism and the history of different Jewish views of the afterlife. So this is now actually from Sonsino and Syme. So these are rabbinic descriptions. This would be about 1,500 years ago from the Talmud. And I'll just read them. One sage maintained that 3 things, namely Shabbat, sunshine, and sexual intercourse, are central in this world as well as the world to come. He was not alone in viewing paradise as a sensual place. We read that the righteous will sit at golden tables. So all these quotes are from the Talmud. This one is from Ta'anit. On stools of gold, from Ketubot, and participate in lavish banquets. A 3rd century Babylonian scholar, Rav, disagreed. In the world to come, there is neither eating nor drinking, nor procreation of children, nor business transactions, no envy or hatred or rivalry, but the righteous sit enthroned, their crowns on their head, and enjoy the luster of the Shekhinah. Most of the rabbis saw paradise as a place of reward, agreeing with Rabbi Tarfon, who taught, "You know that the bestowal of reward on the righteous will be in the time to come." One reason why Judaism would have to embrace something after this life is to get God off the hook for tragedy and evil in this world. So if there's reward and punishment in the afterlife, it addresses the question of understanding when bad things happen to good people, or even the more annoying problem of when good things happen to bad people. Their reward and their punishment will be in an afterlife. Okay, so now I'm just going to dive in, as I've been doing the whole, this session, on some of these myths. So you've probably heard this idea of 7 heavens. So here is a myth that discusses it. There are 7 heavens. The first serves to renew the work of creation every day. The second is that in which the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations are set. In the third, millstones grind manna for the righteous. In the fourth is the heavenly Jerusalem, where the temple and the altar are built. There Michael, Israel's guardian angel, makes offerings. In the fifth heaven, there are companies of the ministering angels who are silent by day and utter divine songs at night. In the sixth heaven are stored the treasuries of snow and hail, and the lofts of dews and raindrops, the chambers of whirlwind and storm, the cave of vapor and the doors of fire. The seventh is the highest heaven, Aravot, where are found the treasuries of peace and blessing, the souls of the righteous and the souls not yet created, as well as the dew with which God will revive the dead. So too there are many kinds of angels, the Ophanim and the Seraphim, and the holy living creatures and the ministering angels, and the throne of God, high and exalted, dwells above them all. This is also Talmud and Talmudic era. So some discussion of women in paradise. There are 6 palaces in paradise where the souls of righteous women make their home. Each of these righteous women have a palace of her own. In each chamber there are beautiful canopies with angels set over them, and every day they are crowned with the radiance of Shekhinah. The first palace is ruled by Bittiah, Pharaoh's daughter, who raised Moses as if he were her own son. She teaches the commandments of the Torah to the many thousands of myriads of pious women who are with her, and she serves as their queen. These women still maintain their human form, and they are clothed in garments of light, and there is great joy among them. 3 times a day, Bittiah goes to a place where there is a curtain and bows before the image of Moses, saying, "Fortunate am I for drawing such a light out of the water." The next palace is of Sarah bat Asher, who rules over thousands of myriads of righteous women. They busy themselves with praises of the Lord and contemplate the commandments of Torah. 3 times a day, Sarah goes to a curtain and bows before the image of Joseph, saying, "Happy was the day on which I gave the good news about Joseph to my grandfather Jacob." And I don't know if you know the legend of Sarah bat Asher. She is mentioned both among the 70 people that go down to Egypt with Jacob in the beginning of the book of Shemot, book of Exodus. And she's also mentioned in the generation of the Exodus. So it's 200 to 400 years later. So there's a lot of legends. Now, maybe completely different people, who knows, what the actual scholarly reason behind it, but because the same name is mentioned, there is a legend that she lived from the time of Joseph until the time of Moses and the Exodus. More about women in paradise. And you can see some of this. There's a lot of different sources, but the Zohar is a prominent source here. The other palaces are provided over by Yocheved, the mother of Moses, Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Moses, and Devorah, the prophetess. All day long, the women are by themselves, as are the men, for there is a curtain spread out in paradise that separates them. A mechitza. The men and women are separated, but every night they come together at midnight, for that is the hour of copulation. Then they cleave soul to soul and light to light, and the fruit of this union are the souls of those who become converts to Judaism. Hidden deep within these 6 palaces are the 4 hidden palaces of the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. No one can imagine what joy and purity are found there, for no one has seen these palaces or is permitted to reveal anything about them. In this extensive book by Simcha Raphael, he summarizes the idea of the journey of the soul after death. So this is a Kabbalistic notion, and Kabbalah very much embraces the idea of reincarnation. Standard rabbinic thought is in resurrection, in the day of the coming of the Messiah. Kabbalah embraces reincarnation, and there's some. It's difficult to combine those 2 ideas. One of the things I've learned in my interfaith discussions is the idea of reincarnation is absolutely outside the bounds of Christianity. And it's also outside the bounds of Islam, which surprised me. I actually raised this question just a week or 2 ago. So this is sort of a synthesis of the Kabbalistic understandings following Simcha Raphael. So at the moment of death, so there are different levels of the soul. There's nefesh, ruach, and so on. Nefesh, which is the most grounded earthly soul, suffers the experience of the dying process, of the grave, and separation from the physical body. And the separation takes 7 days, and that's the mythological connection with Shiva. This soul experiences the river of light, encounters angelic spirits and deceased relatives, and undergoes a life review. One of the things that's common and interesting in many of these myths is the idea of your reviewing your life. And I don't know if you, I can't remember the name of the movie. There's a great movie about this idea of life review. It's actually a funny movie. Ruach experiences the cleansing of Gehenna. We're going to talk about Gehenna. Gehenna is sort of a purgatory, a place where you pay for your sins, a time to experience and resolve unresolved emotions. My question is that post-mortem psychotherapy. This takes up to a year, and the deceased is helped by the children's Kaddish and enters lower Gan Eden. Gan Eden is the Garden of Eden, a world of emotional bliss where the personality is completed. And as we'll see, we get a break from Gehenna on Shabbat. That's going to be one of the interesting ideas that is developed. A higher level of the soul now takes another dip in the river of light and enters upper Gan Eden, the heavenly repose for the soul. Actually, I want to back up for a second. There is this concept that the journey of the departed is aided in the next life by people reciting Kaddish in his or her name. So that's one of the reasons for reciting Kaddish. I mean, particularly if you look at the mourner's Kaddish, you don't find any mention of death or dying or sadness or whatever. It's a poem of praises and consolations to God. So the question is, why are we praising God at difficult times? And one idea here is that the journey of the soul in the next life is assisted by people praising, by survivors praising God in their name. Neshama takes another dip in the river of light and enters upper Gan Eden, the heavenly repose for the soul. The quality of your stay here depends on your focus in life. If it was on the physical, upper Gan Eden won't seem like much. If it was on the spiritual, you reap the spiritual reward and experience transcendent bliss. Yearly Kaddish at the time of Yortzeit is said to elevate the soul to higher spheres annually. The sources speak of seeing God. Next level higher is Chaya, returns to the storehouse of souls in preparation for rebirth. If in the previous stage we see God, in this stage we are beings with God in a Tzror Chachayim, the storehouse of souls, or in the bundle of life. The associated morning ritual here is Yizkor, which is 4 times a year, not only on Yom Kippur. Still a higher level is Yechida, is joined with God. You see in Yechida the root word of Echad, is joined with God and then is placed in the womb. The soul in the womb is shown the entire world. Gan Eden, which is sort of the heavens, Gehenna, the purgatory, hell, and where it will live and die, and some say the entire Torah. When the moment of birth arrives, the angel touches the baby just between the nose, beneath the nose, and the soul forgets all it has learned. The rabbis believe that the dead can communicate with both the human and heavenly realms, where they petition for mercy on behalf of the living. They speak of the dead being on the other side of a curtain. I'll just comment on that. In Morocco, Sonia would tell me, my wife Sonia was brought up in Morocco, and several times a year, they would visit what she would describe as the tombs, the graves of the saints. Saint has sort of a Christian connotation in our ears. I think in Hebrew it would be the tzaddikim, the graves of the righteous, and they would light candles at the graves and I think it was on the yahrzeit of these, great rabbis. And because there were so many people visiting, the paraffin would just melt, and it would like be a bonfire on these graves. It's kind of a dramatic image to me. And there are stories in the Talmud about people connecting with the dead on the other side of the curtain. It's called a parochet. The parochet in the synagogue is the curtain in the ark. And I say this at every funeral. I've heard too many stories about these connections of people with departed to deny that possibility. And believe me, this kind of spirituality and mysticism does not come naturally to someone who is trained as a physicist. But there's one of the things that Eli Spitzer, who wrote that book, Does the Soul Survive, says once he was publicly open about this possibility, people would come to him and tell him stories. And some of them, including near-death experiences and post-mortem contact, are really fascinating. I can't remember if I read this. Yes, I did read it. So, what is hell like? Gehenna. The term Gehenna dates from the biblical period, referring to a valley in Jerusalem called Ge Ben Hinnom, the valley of the sons of Hinnom. It was the site of a cult whose rituals included the sacrifice by burning alive of children. So from a Jewish point of view, I don't know if you've gotten to this in 2 Kings, from a Jewish point of view, the idea of sacrificing your children is as close to imagining hell as we can imagine. The Talmud states, that's Rosh Hashanah, 17a, wrongdoers of Israel who sin with their body and wrongdoers of the Gentiles who sin with their body go to Gehenna and are punished there for 12 months. Although some sages argued that after 12 months they would be annihilated forever, Rabbi Akiva taught that the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna shall only endure 12 months. After this year, he taught, and his teaching prevailed, even the wicked would be returned to paradise. This is the source of the custom for mourning parents for 11 months. You may know this, that there are, when someone dies, close relatives of the person who died are subject to mourning rituals. And this is the children of the deceased, the siblings, spouse, and God forbid, parents of the deceased. And there's an intense period of mourning for everyone for 7 days, a less intense period of mourning for 30 days. 7 days is Shiva, that's just a word for 7. Shloshim, 30 days. And then Shana for 11 months. Why 11 months? The maximum sentence, as we just saw in Gehenna, is 12 months. So why do you say Kaddish at every service for 11 months? Well, you don't want to make a public statement that mom or dad, needed every last day in Gehenna to pay off all the sins they committed. Nor is anybody going to ask you what you think. So you think, well, maybe 50-50. I'll mourn for 6 months. So everybody mourns for 11 months just to be on the safe side. Rabbi Hanina taught that punishment was temporary for all except the following: the adulterer, one who puts his fellow to shame in public, and one who calls his fellow by an obnoxious nickname. This is a message I'm trying to get out to politicians, some of whom you may have heard will call people by obnoxious nicknames. But it emphasizes how significant Judaism treats this idea of shaming someone else. If, in theory, for murder, you're only there for a year maximum, but for shaming someone, you can be there for eternity. So where is Gehenna? So here's the Temple Mount and the Western Wall and the Old City. And if you go actually in this direction, which is toward the new city, toward HUC and the King David Hotel, there's a valley that kind of runs down through this area. And that is the valley of Ge Ben Hinnom, the valley of the sons of Hinnom. And now there's a theater there. I'm not sure how old this picture is. So it's not designated or marked off in any way. Okay, so now some myths of hell. So why are there strange marriages? You may wonder about this, right? Why are marriages so strange? So here's a really interesting idea. Demonic doubles. The kingdom of Satan is measure for measure like the kingdom of man. I should say Satan in the Bible plays a very minor role. Only a significant character in the book of Job, where he is sort of like a district attorney. But in the Kabbalah and later material, and certainly it's true in Christianity, Satan has a major role. Even in Islam, where it's called Iblis or Shaitan, a significant role. And in Talmudic and mystical literature, there's a lot of material about Satan. So this is I think it's from the mystical literature. Every male child, when born, already has a double in the kingdom of demons. So too does every female, when she is born, have her shadow born there as well, in her precise shape and image, not unlike that seen in a mirror. And at the hour that a heavenly voice goes forth to announce this one will be married to that one, a partner is also prepared at the same time in the spirit world. She sits and waits for him there from that time forward. And the man who is fortunate marries his partner from the family of man. But less fortunate is he who is found alone on the fourth night of the week or in the night of the Sabbath, for then he is in danger of being kidnapped by the sons of Satan and led to a place no man's feet should enter, there to marry not his intended, but the intended demonic double. The Talmud explains that 40 days before a person is born, a heavenly voice goes forth to say, this one will be married to that one. And that's in the Talmud. This knowledge is available to the angels, but not only the angels, the demons too overhear this voice and make evil use of the knowledge they obtain. Thus, in effect, the Beshert tradition, where a person seeks out and marries his or her destined one, has been corrupted and effectively reversed by demons. You probably have heard the concept of the Beshert. My understanding, and maybe some of you know German. I can't remember if one of you knows German. My understanding is the word, Suzanne, do you know German?
I know a little bit.
Yeah, no, Suzanne Koppel.
Oh, Copo, she does, yeah.
Yeah. So my understanding is the word Beshert is a Yiddish word which comes from the Yiddish word, which is also a German word for shears, like scissors. Does that sound right to you? Could be. You're muted, so we can't hear you. So my understanding is the idea of Beshert is literally the one who is cut out for you, the one for whom you are cut out. So that's something I learned along the way. Okay, moving along, the light of Gehenna. Sometimes a light issues forth from Gehenna into the Garden of Eden. This is a sign that God has accepted the grief of one of the souls that is being punished. The soul's contrition warrants entry into the Garden of Eden, where its suffering is transformed into delight. This myth is in direct contrast to the darkness of Gehenna. It shows that God continues to monitor the grief of the sinners in Gehenna, and that he is prepared at a moment's notice to accept deeply felt full repentance to free those sinners from the punishment of Gehenna. In contrasting Gehenna with the Christian concept of hell, it is important to note that the punishments of hell are supposed to last forever, while the time the soul of the sinner spends being punished in Gehenna is limited to a maximum of 12 months. And ultimately, when the Messiah comes, Gehenna will cease to exist. The inhabitants of Gehenna. The souls of the wicked descend below to Gehenna, as it is said, quote from Ecclesiastes, the spirit of the beast goes downward to the earth. This includes the utterly wicked in Israel and the wicked among the nations of the earth. Both will go down to Gehenna, as it is said, the wind shall carry them off and the whirlwind shall scatter them. This myth answers the question of whether the punishments of Gehenna are limited to Jews or whether they apply to the wicked of other nations. Here, both are described as being punished in Gehenna. The fate of slanderers. We talked about slanderers before. What is the fate of slanderers? When slander spread about the earth mounts even to the throne of glory, destroying angels descend at God's command and seize the slanderers and throw them into the furnace of Gehenna. But Gehenna objects, saying, The tongue of the slanderer reaches from the earth up into the heavens. The entire world cannot stand him. First send your arrows at him. Then I will receive him, as it is said, a warrior's sharp arrows with the hot coals of broomwood, from Psalms. Then those who slander are hung by their tongues and subject to all the tortures that Gehenna has to offer. The most despicable creatures in Gehenna are the slanderers. Not even Gehenna, personified here, can bear their presence. So Gehenna insists that God punish them first, and then Gehenna will receive them, according to the verse, a warrior's sharp arrows with hot coals of broomwood. Here the coals of broomwood refer to the punishments of Gehenna. For another example of the personification of Gehenna, there's another myth that he refers to. Note that the sinners are cast into the furnace of Gehenna, where the hottest flames of Gehenna are burning. This is to demonstrate the seriousness of their sins. The other thing that's worth noting here is how these myths are always going back to typically biblical material. The Bible is sort of a source of infinite meaning. There's the sort of the surface meaning, but when the rabbis and others, the mystics, are dreaming up these images, they will take a verse from the Bible and build on them to try and tease out what's going on, in the afterlife. Oh, this is my favorite. Sabbath in Gehenna. Even the wicked in Gehenna enjoy a respite on the Sabbath. Every Sabbath eve, when the day becomes sanctified, the angel in charge of souls announces, "Let the punishment of the sinners cease, for the Holy King approaches, and the day is about to be sanctified. He protects all." Instantly, all punishment ceases, and the guilties have a respite. The sinners who observe the Sabbath are led to 2 mountains of snow, where they remain until the end of the Sabbath, where the angel in charge of the spirits shout, "All evildoers, back to Gehenna. The Sabbath is over," and they are thrust back to their former place in hell. Some of them, however, take snow with them to cool them off during the 6 days of the week. But God says to them, "Woe to you who steal even in hell." But the fires do not come to a halt for those who never observe the Sabbath, since they did not observe the Sabbath before, though they do not have respite. This is actually, I must admit, I sometimes forget that last line, but I love this idea that even in hell, Shabbat is still Shabbat. A little more on that in a moment. Oh yeah, this is my favorite. This is actually from a Chabad article. I heard this legend and I found it online. And this is what I was telling you earlier, Rabbi Singer. Why do we smell aromatic spices, besamim, at Havdalah? You know about other teachings. Here's one that I bet you didn't know. Although the loss of the extra soul is the main reason for smelling the fragrance on Motzei Shabbat, there are other reasons as well. This idea is you get an extra soul, a neshama Torah, on the Sabbath that accompanies you on the Sabbath, and at Havdalah, that soul departs from you. So your soul needs some consolation, so you smell the sweet smell of the spices. But here's another idea. At the outset of Shabbat, the fires of hell are extinguished, and the souls that are there get a bit of rest. At the conclusion of Shabbat, the fires are reignited, and the soul can sometimes feel a weakness or depression that comes over it as it catches a whiff of the stench emanating from hell. We therefore smell the besamim to give the soul strength. Some explain that this reason really comes together with the loss of the extra soul. For the reason why the soul is more susceptible to depression is because it's already suffering a loss. So the idea is, at the close of Shabbat, the fires of hell are being reignited, and presumably there's some sulfur dioxide or other, foul-smelling smoke from these fires. So we smell some sweet spices at the Havdalah candle to protect us from the fires of Gehenna, which are being reignited. The Messiah in hell. When Rabbi Joshua ben Levi found himself in the Garden of Eden, he decided to explore it as completely as he could. And typically when they refer to Gan Eden here, Garden of Eden, they're talking about the heavens, not the earthly Garden of Eden. One by one, he explored the 9 palaces of, I'll just call it Gan Eden, until he came to the palace of the Messiah. We're going to have a session about the myths of the Messiah and different palaces of the Messiah. He recognized the Messiah by the splendor of his aura. He saw how the patriarchs and kings came to the Messiah every Sabbath and holy day and wept because it was not yet time for him, the Messiah, to go forth into the world. When Rabbi Joshua came before the Messiah said, "How are my children faring?" And Rabbi Joshua said, "Every day they await you." Then the Messiah gave a great sigh and wept. After that, the Messiah showed Rabbi Joshua all of the earthly garden and the heavenly one as well, and revealed the greatest mysteries to him. But when Rabbi Joshua asked to be shown hell, at first the Messiah refused, for the righteous are not permitted to behold hell. But when Rabbi Joshua told him it was his intention to measure hell from beginning to end, the Messiah agreed to take him there. So it was that Rabbi Joshua followed the Messiah until they reached the fiery gates of hell. When the angels guarding the gate saw that the Messiah was with him, they admitted him at once. Everywhere they went, Rabbi Joshua saw the punishments of hell, where the avenging angels smite the wicked with flaming rods and throw them into fiery pits, and after that they hang by their tongues, or by the organs by which they committed adultery. A pleasant thought. And although Rabbi Joshua tried to measure the compartments of hell, he found that they were boundless, as was the suffering of the wicked. But whenever the wicked in hell saw the light of the Messiah, they rejoiced and cried out, "There is the one who will bring us out of here." Purified souls from the Zohar. When the process of purification has been complete, the chief angels take a soul out of Gehenna and lead it to the gate of paradise. There they say to the angels standing guard, "This soul was broken after its ordeal in the eternal fire, and now it has come to you pure and white." Then God causes the sun to penetrate the firmament and shed its rays on the soul and heal it. The purpose of Gehenna is to purify the souls of the sinners so that they can be permitted to enter paradise. This myth demonstrates how a soul taken out of Gehenna is taken out of Gehenna. Note that the purification process is clearly described as a painful one, where the soul is purified in the fires of Gehenna. Now, with all these folks in Gehenna, the question arises, when you look around and you see other people, how will they appear to you? The day a person dies is the day of judgment, when the soul departs from the body. A person does not leave this world until he sees the Shekhinah, accompanied by 3 ministering angels, who receive the soul of a righteous person. These angels examine a person's deeds and insist that a person confess to all that the body has done with the soul in this world. After this confession, the soul of the righteous person rejoices in its parting from the world and looks forward with delight to the world to come. For when God takes the souls of the righteous, he takes it with gentleness. But when he takes the souls of the wicked, he does so through cruel angels. As it is said, "Therefore a cruel angel shall be sent against him," from Proverbs. After a person dies, he can be seen by all the others who are dead. To each of them he appears as they last saw him alive. Some see him as youth, others as an old man. For the angel who guards the dead makes his soul assume these various forms, so that all recognize him by seeing him just as they saw him in life. However, if a man is condemned to punishment in Gehenna, he's enveloped in smoke and brimstone, so that none of those being punished can see any of the punishment of any other. Thus, none are put to shame except those who others have put to shame. So this idea of actually guarding you against being seen by other people who you know, never mind they're in hell also, but you'll be protected by smoke. So that's the myths of hell. We can have some discussion afterwards. Anybody has a question, you can chime in. Now, the myths of the angel of death. If you're like me, you've heard about the angel of death, Malach HaMavet. So here we go. And here's one of the myths, although it really isn't in the Torah. It says that God passed over the houses. So here's a image of a family, presumably on the eve of Passover. I recognize that because you see blood on the doorposts, and the angel of death is not entering the house with the blood on the doorposts. The creation of the angel of death. So this is Midrash. I'm just looking down below, Genesis Rabbah, Exodus Rabbah. Some say that the only thing created on the first day of creation was the angel of death. How do we know this? By the word darkness in the verse, Choshech al panei tahom. Darkness was over the face of the deep. But others say that when God created the world, there was no angel of death. So when was the angel of death created? Some say it was at the time of the sin of Adam and Eve. For the serpent was the angel of death, and it caused death for the entire world. We're actually going to have a session on myths of the Garden of Eden. But others say the angel of death did not come into being until Cain slew Abel, for until then no one had died, and there was no need for such an angel. Then God transformed Cain into the angel of death as punishment for having slain his brother, and that is how the angel of death came into being. Cain served as the angel of death for 130 years, wandering and roaming about accursed. After the death of Cain, Lamech took his place as the angel of death. You may have heard of Rabbi Judah Loew. He was the one who created the golem in Prague. One night, not long before the holy days were to begin, Rabbi Loew glimpsed a light in the synagogue across the way, and he wondered who might be there at that hour. He left his house, and as he approached the synagogue, he saw through the window a strange figure standing at the pulpit. The closer Rabbi Loew came, the more sinister did the figure seem. And suddenly Rabbi Loew realized who it was, the angel of death. And at the same time, he came close enough to see the angel sharpening a knife over a long scroll on which many names were written. Rabbi Loew was pierced with terror and resisted a powerful impulse to run away. But a moment later, he became calm and self-possessed, for he knew what he had to do. As silently as possible, he opened the door to the synagogue and came up behind the dreaded angel. All at once, he snatched the long list out of the angel's hands, tearing it away from him, and ran away from the synagogue to his home, where he threw the list into the flame and watched until every scrap had burned to ashes. Now, the plague had begun to spread in the city, and that was the list of victims that the angel of death had come to take in one fell swoop. Now, only those on the piece of the list left in the angel of death's hands, fell victim to him. All the rest was spared. But among those on the list was Rabbi Loew, and it was he above all whom the angel was determined to capture. Rabbi Loew, who could read the lines of the future, knew that the angel would try and snatch him to seek revenge. But Rabbi Loew used his powers to avoid the angel, much as King David had done, studying Torah day and night. For the angel of death is forbidden to take a person when he is engaged in the study of Torah. Even so, the angel found a ruse by which to capture him. He hid in a rose of great beauty that grew in the garden of Rabbi Loew's grandson. One day, the boy picked the rose as a gift for his grandfather and held it in his hands to present it to Rabbi Loew. The rabbi perceived the presence of the dark angel hidden in the rose. Then he did not hesitate, but accepted the gift from his grandson, for he knew that if he did not, the boy's life would be endangered. But no sooner did Rabbi Loew take it in his hand that the angel of death struck him like a serpent and snatched his soul. This is actually kind of a funny comment. These comments are by Schwartz, the author of this book, Tree of Souls. A major study of the legends of the angel of death were undertaken by Chaim Schwartzbaum in the last years of his life. Professor Dov Noy tells the story that he once asked Schwartzbaum why it was taking him so long to finish the book on the angel of death. Schwartzbaum replied that he believed the angel of death would prefer to take him after he had finished the book, and that's why he was taking his time. Unfortunately, he died before the book was completed. As we'll see, there's this concept about the angel of death. We're going to see this in a couple of legends of coming to take people. And there's also a lot of, particularly Ashkenazi legends, that the angel of death is something of a simpleton or an idiot. The angel of conception and the angel of death. Among the angels, there is one who serves as the midwife of souls. This is Lila, the angel of conception. When the time has come for a man and his wife to conceive a child, God directs Lila to seek out a certain soul hidden in the Garden of Eden and command it to enter a drop of semen. So this is reincarnation. At first, the soul refuses, for it still remembers the pain of being born and prefers to remain pure. But Lila compels the soul to obey, and that is when God decrees that the fate of the sperm will be, whether male or female, strong or weak, rich or poor, and so on. Then the angel turns around and places the soul in the womb of the mother. When the infant grows in the womb, Lila places a lighted candle at the head of the unborn infant. Do not try this at home. And so he can see from one end of the world to the other. As it is said, his lamp shone above my head, and by his light I walk through darkness, from the book of Job. For 9 months, Lila watches over the unborn infant, teaching him the entire Torah, as well as the history of his soul. During this time, the evil inclination has no power over him. And before he is born, he is given an oath to keep his soul pure, lest God take it back from him. Then Lila leads the child into the Garden of Eden and shows him the righteous ones with crowns on their head. So too does Lila lead the child to the netherworld and show him the punishments of Gehenna. But when the time has come to be born, the angel extinguishes the lamp and brings forth the child into the world. The instant the child emerges, Lila lightly strikes the newborn above the lip, causing it to cry out. And at that instant, the infant forgets all it has learned. That is the origin of the mark on the upper lip, which everyone bears. Indeed, Lila is a guardian angel who watches over the child all his days. And when the time comes to take leave of the world, it is Lila who comes to him and says, "Do you recognize me? The time of your departure has come. I have come to take you from this world." Thereupon, Lila leads him to the world to come, where he renders an accounting to God and is judged according to his merits. So this is the spot. It's called a philtrum, where the angel touches you in utero and causes you to forget everything you've learned. And there are fascinating studies of hypnosis, taking people back in time to their childhood. And then there's this one doctor, God, I can't remember his name, but he's quoted significantly in that book, Does the Soul Survive?, who has, by hypnotism, taken people back to past lives. This is the book, Many Lives, Many Masters, the name of the author. And so you can understand it psychologically, believe it or not. But the interesting thing to me are stories where people under hypnosis go to prior lives and they speak languages that they don't know. There's one case where a woman who only spoke Japanese was, with the help of a translator, taken back into a prior life, and she started speaking another language. So there's something going on here. I mean, I'm a scientist. I'm pretty rational, but there's stuff going on here. So which of course very interested in. I'm not going to try and read this. It's very small print, but I just want to point out that this is from the CCAR responses. So this is reform rulemaking. It's fairly old. It's 1932. But basically, you probably know the custom of not naming a child after a living relative. It turns out this is an Ashkenazi custom. It's not a Sephardic custom. And my understanding of it, and it's borne out in this discussion, the discussion is very detailed, that the basic idea is the angel of death isn't all that bright. And so the angel of death is coming to look for Yitzchak, the Alta Yitzchak, the grandfather. And if there's a little baby Yitzchak in the crib, the angel of death is looking at the chart, looking at the list, and might take the wrong Yitzchak. So therefore, the Ashkenazim don't name a child after a living relative. In fact, a wonderful Yiddish curse is the one that says, "May someone be named after you, and soon." the understanding is it's a roundabout way of saying drop dead. In the Sephardic world, it's exactly the opposite. Again, son, you grew up in that world, and it is almost mandatory to name a child, particularly after a grandparent. And I once heard in a lecture someone say that's how we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were Ashkenazi, because if they were Sephardic, it would have been Abraham, Isaac, and Abraham. I guess kind of fun. And there's also another responsum about changing your name. I don't know if you know this tradition. Again, I'm pretty sure it's only Ashkenazi. I'm not positive about that. That if someone's sick, they change their name, often to Chaim or to Chava, which are, both male and female ways of speaking about life. And again, this idiotic angel of death is there looking for, Yitzhak, and there's no Yitzhak around, just Chaim. So goes off, and this is actually pretty common, I would say. Maybe not in your children and grandchildren's generation, but whenever I talk about this, particularly among people in my own generation, you will hear stories of people who have changed their name. So that's, it's almost 7 o'clock. So next time we are going to discuss the delightful and surprising mythology of Judaism, focusing on Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. So bring your own fig leaf. So I'm going to stop sharing. So if there's any question or discussion, we can entertain those or send you on your way. Avoid Gehenna.
Anyone have comments or questions?
I have a question. How
Go
does
ahead,
this
Ezra.
apply to non-Jews?
So how does it apply to non-Jews? So first of all, these are Jewish teachings. One thing I will say, and I didn't talk about it very much, but Judaism teaches that the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come, so that in a way, well, it quite simply, it means that you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy the benefits of the afterlife, whatever they are. And
Where
in
does
fact,
this leave people like Hitler and Stalin?
how would it apply to people like Hitler and Stalin? Is that what you're asking?
Stalin, yes.
Yeah, so presumably, if you accept the Jewish teachings on this, they would have gone to Gehenna, and because I would say of the magnitude of their sins, they would be condemned to eternal punishment in Gehenna, as I read the tradition.
Thank you.
So Christine is asking about ghosts. Do you know anything about ghosts?
So what I would say is there are stories in the Talmud about communicating with people in the next world. So there's actually a very famous story about basically the issue is, when do you plant your seeds for crops? If you plant your seeds too soon, they won't grow very well. And if you plant them too late, they won't grow very well. So what you really would like is a long-range weather forecast. So there's actually a discussion in the Talmud, I think it's in Ta'anit, but I'm not sure, where people go to a graveyard and sit around the gravestones and consult with the spirits in the graveyard, and they get information about planting. I don't know, we have sort of a sense in English that ghosts are things that haunt. So there's just communication between worlds. I'll tell you a personal story, that my wife talks about, and she is the natural mystic in the family. Rabbi Singer knows her very well. She officiated at our marriage. So she's from Morocco, which is sort of a mystical place, right? So there is this idea which you heard about of reincarnation, and there is a concept that the soul of a departed. So this is the soul. I don't know if you call it a ghost. The soul of the departed wants to re-enter the world. When Sonia was living in New York, she was recently married to her first husband. And she had a very vivid, image of her aunt, Anita. In her family, people had Spanish names because they were from Spain in 1492. So she had an Aunt Anita, and her Aunt Anita had died, and Sonia knew she was dead, but she had this super realistic image. She was terrified when she saw Anita. And Anita came to her and said that she was looking for a place to re-enter the world and was hoping that Sonia would become pregnant so Anita could re-enter the world. Sonia told her that, no, we just got married, we're not ready to have children, and she left. Meanwhile, she went that day, or maybe a day later, almost immediately, back to Sonia's mother, her sister, telling the mother, I don't know if it was in a dream or not, I have to ask Sonia, that she went to Sonia and there was no room for her at Sonia's place. How did Sonia hear about this? This was, back in the 70s. There was no internet, there was no cell phone or anything. Sonia's mother wrote a letter to her telling her that your Aunt Anita visited me, saying she had visited you and there was no room. So what did Anita do? Anita went to Israel, where some of the family lived, and looked for a place to re-enter the world. And sure enough, somebody in the family, a cousin or somebody, had a baby in Israel. And the baby was named Yael. Nice Hebrew name. But they always called her Anita as a nickname because everybody knew this was Anita's soul. The funny thing is, Sonia met her at a bar mitzvah in Paris. Actually, I'm going to a wedding in Paris in the end of August, and I hope to meet her. And Sonia said when she saw this person, it was like their souls locked onto each other, like they were instantly in sync with each other. And Sonia found out that this is, the cousin. And she asked her, do you know why? They said, she asked her, my name's Yael. They said, do they call you Anita? And she says, yes. And she said, Sonia said to her, do you know why they call you Anita? And she said, no one ever told me. And so Sonia told her, and she must have been in her 40s or so, why she was called Anita. So you hear stories like this. And so I don't know if you would call it a ghost. There is actually some traditions of exorcism. So maybe that's more like being haunted. And you may have heard the story of the Dybbuk. There was a play and a movie. How many of you ever heard of the word Dybbuk? So, yeah, a few. So that's the idea that a soul can't move on to the next world and can actually inhabit the person. So in this play, a man dies, and he can't bear to leave his fiancée, so he actually inhabits the body of the fiancée while she's still alive, and they do an exorcism. And I have to tell you, this may shock Rabbi Singer. Maybe I once did an exorcism. I had a congregant whose wife died, and this congregant kept seeing his wife, and it was really, really bothering him. So what I went and did was, I don't know if I changed or put up additional mezuzahs, and said, as we put up these mezuzahs, we gave permission to his wife to move on to the next world. And it worked. It's far be it from me if it works, maybe I suspect it was a sacred placebo. But I have to say I didn't follow any sort of rabbinic formula. It was just the idea of helping her move on, him move on, so again, I don't know if you would describe those as ghosts, but clearly there is a belief, and I think there's evidence for this concept. And I've heard people, maybe some of you have your own stories of visions of people.
I was going to add one thing, because that story that you told about Anita is amazing. But there's a story about Rabbi Akiva in the medieval period, going to a cemetery, seeing a ghost, working really hard.
Mhm.
And Akiva says to him, "Why are you working so hard?" And the ghost says, "Well, I was a bad man. I was a tax collector. I got a woman pregnant. I don't even know if I had a girl
Mhm.
or a boy." And Akiva goes into town to find out, and finds out that it's a boy, and teaches him Torah, of course.
Mhm.
And when the boy goes to the synagogue and says something like the Kaddish,
Right.
the father's soul is released, which is a story about how the mourner's Kaddish became
Right.
mourner's Kaddish.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there
Right.
is that's a story in our tradition.
Yes, and all of these other stories are in our tradition. They're just much less well known than Akiva stories. There's also a beautiful idea which I love, and it's common both to Jewish thinking about reincarnation and Eastern religions like Buddhism and Jainism that address the idea of reincarnation. And the idea is that groups of souls hang out together. So I always say this at a funeral. I talk about it, and I say, I hope you all like each other, because if they're right, then in the next Gilgul, there's this phrase which actually comes from a circle of the incarnation is a Gilgul. In the next incarnation, you might be brother and sister in this incarnation. You might be cousins. You might be teacher and student. You might be friends. You might be mother and child. So the relationships are different, but the teaching is that groups of souls hang out together through eternity. And I love that idea. I have no idea how they know this. I mean, that any of this is how they know it. The scientist part of my brain is
Christine says it's called constellations.
What do you mean by constellations? I don't.
I just heard that term of souls that stay together. The constellation.
As in stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is the word mazal, which we often think of as luck, actually means constellations of stars. The rabbis were believers in astrology. And so I have my own theory that may be the real reason behind 12 tribes. And even in the Christian world, the 12 disciples of Jesus, that the number 12 pops up in astrology. And the word mazal means astrological signs. So I like that idea of constellations. It's groups of stars, people going up to the heavens that are associated with each other. And, as we know, those stars stay in association as the seasons change. Yeah. So, and it just helped track down that. Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions before we say goodnight to Rabbi Lotker? Well, thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Thank you, rabbis.
Well, thank you for putting up with me. So next time, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And yeah, so I'm going to have another shocking thing to tell you about the Garden of Eden. And this one is it's not about Hamantash. It's not about smelling the spices at Abdallah. This is actually from science and biology relating to the story of the Garden of Eden. So I will leave that as a teaser.
A little cliffhanger for next time.
Yes. And
Right.
I love talking to non-Christians about the Garden of Eden, because Eden is so central in one interpretation of that story for Christians, whereas it's clearly Jews do different things with the story than do Christian. So anyway, I wish you a good evening and thank you for coming, and we'll see you when we say goodbye.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.
We'll put
Take
up
care.
with you anytime.
Thank you.
Yes, we will. Thank